Welcome to another Macworld video. I'm Breen. One of the features introduced with macOS 10 Lion was mission control, a feature that can be useful, but one that is often ignored by Mac users. In the next few minutes, I'll show you ways to put mission control to good use in the hope that you'll find ways to incorporate it into your computing life. Mission control is a way of creating multiple desktop environments or spaces. So, one desktop may be your Finder windows, for example. And another one may contain a couple of applications, in this case, iCal and Address Book. And this is useful in a couple of ways. If you have limited desktop space, as you would on a smallish laptop, you can use mission control as a way to expand that space so that your desktop is less cluttered. It's also a nice way to organize your work by tasks. So again, in this case, I have Address Book and iCal in the same desktop space, and here I can organize my life. Working with mission control is easy. All you have to do to launch it is to click on mission control in the dock, or if you have a Mac with a trackpad, just swipe up 3 fingers. Or you can use the Mac's keyboard, hold down the control key and press control up arrow, and there's mission control. To add a space, just move your cursor to the top right and click on the plus button, and here's a new space. To activate that space, all you have to do is click on it. To help identify spaces, let's change the desktop background of our second space. I'll hold down Control, click, and choose Change Desktop Background. Choose Desktop Pictures, and we'll choose this beach scene. Now let's add another space. So I'll swipe up with 3 fingers, click plus, and I'll select that space. Now I can change this desktop background as well, but I'm going to do it in a different way, and here's how. Swipe up, I'll choose my second desktop, click and hold on the desktop and screensaver preference window, and I move it to the right. When I do, I can drag it into the next space, as you can see here. I'll change this desktop background as well, and invoke mission control. And you can see that each space now has a different desktop background, and that makes it easier for me to identify which space I happen to be working at the time. Now that's kind of an awkward way to move between spaces. Another way to do it, again, trackpad, swipe to the left with 3 fingers, and swipe to the right with 3 fingers, and you can move between spaces. With a keyboard, Control left arrow to move to the left, and Control right arrow to move to the right. Now let's put a couple of apps in a specific space. So I'll move to my second space. I click and hold on Address Book, choose Options, and then I'll choose Assign to this desktop. I'll do the same thing with iCal. Options, this desktop. Now I'll move to a different space. Here's my first space, and I'll click on iCal. When I do, I automatically move to that next space because I've assigned this application to that space. So anytime I'm going to work in iCal, I will work in this space. Now, one other way that desktop spaces are created is through full screen apps. Let's take a look at Safari for this example. So I click on Safari. I'll go to Macworld. And I click on the full screen button at the top of the window. Now watch what happens in mission control when I do that. Here's mission control, and here's Safari as its own space. And it's its own space because it's a full screen app. Go back to Safari. I move back to the window view, and let's check mission control. And sure enough, that space is gone because Safari is no longer a full screen app. Now we'll launch Safari one more time. Now let's put it back to full screen. And I'll move back to my first space. From here, I press Command-Tab, and I'll choose Safari. And here's Safari. Now let's see what happened in mission control. Notice that Safari has moved out of its original position. Now it's in the number 2 position after the first desktop space. And it is because it's an application within the most recently active space. Now suppose you don't want your most recently active spaces moving around in mission control. You can switch this option off. To do that, just go to System Preferences, go to Mission Control and disable the automatically rearrange spaces based on most recent use option. Go back to Mission Control, and you notice that Safari has moved back to the 4th position, the place we originally set it up, and it will always stay there as long as this option is off. Turn it on, and the most recently active spaces will move forward in Mission Control. One more thing before we go. Suppose you want to remove some of the spaces you've created. Well, you know that if you have a full screen app, all you have to do is reduce it to a window size, and then it disappears as a space. But what if you want to get rid of one of these other spaces? All you have to do is drag your cursor up, wait for the X to appear, and then click on the X. And that causes the space to disappear. So we'll go to Desktop 2, and that's where I have Safari currently. I'll click on its X to close it, and what happens? Safari has now shifted to Desktop 1 because its original space has disappeared. So when you close spaces that have windows or applications in them, they will move to the very first desktop space. And that's the basics of Mission Control. Thanks very much for watching.